very much. Thank you. I'm very excited to be back in Ames, Iowa. My trip 5 years ago was a wonderful trip. I met a lot of people. I hope some of the people I met that night are here again tonight. I think I was here just in the fall of last year. Weather was beautiful. Here I am just in the spring. Dennis Dake tells me not to come in the summer or the winter, so I'm at the right time. The weather you are having, we had in California just before I left, so I brought it with me, I'm afraid. Tonight, I want to address most of my remarks to the art teachers in the audience. We are a beleaguered species. California is a disaster area. We are losing teachers. The budget cuts are horrendous. I just had an emergency call from Irvine, California, which has been one of the best funded art programs in the Southern California area. The emergency call was that with the new funding, they were going to lose 3 of their 6 art teachers. The program was going to be cut. The art teachers who were being replaced were going to be shifted over to teach English and other related subjects closely related to the art field, and so on. So it really is just a disaster. Now, we're at, I think, a strange moment in time in terms of art education. I believe that we're at a moment of shifting over into how shall I say it, not just a new approach or a new appreciation of what art is for, the subject of the National Art Educators Conference, the question, what is art for? Not a change in terms of what art is for, but I think a change in the uses of art in terms of cognition. And it's my belief that if we can manage to sort of slide through this moment of crunch, this moment in history of crunch, that the art teachers will, in fact, have a new mandate. And that mandate will be as teachers of cognition, as well as all of the rest of the things that art is good for. Not just teachers of enrichment programs, not just training up a generation of museum goers by acquainting people with the great works of art, which is a wonderful thing to do. But in addition to all of that, to become teachers who are best able to convey to students another way of thinking. Now, that other way of thinking is indeed powerful. And it's just at this moment in history, when the computer, after all, can do most of what are known as left hemisphere or left brain, or in my terms, L mode functions, the computer can do as fast and, in fact, faster and better than the human brain itself. Just at the moment when that is all in place, computer programmers are now trying to emulate the functions of the other mode of the brain, the visual perceptual mode. This is not coming very rapidly and will not come rapidly. The best thinking is that what is called right hemisphere augmentation in computer programming will not be in place until at least the year 2000. Now, what this means, I mean, it's an odd thing when you think about it. Schools are ever more assiduously training up what the computer actually can do better and faster than the human brain, adding numbers, spelling, even syntax now is available through the digital computer. schools are still training all this stuff up, step by step, the way it was always done. And at the same time, the kids who are computer literate are saying to themselves, why should I learn how to spell? I've got Spellmaster at home. I use my calculator for all the arithmetical stuff. And this is not going to go away. This is going to be more and more and more of this. And at the same time, the functions that are best performed by the right hemisphere are not being trained up in any systematic fashion in schools, not at all. Well, I can't say not at all, in a kind of happenstance way through dance classes, movement, sports, photography, wood shop, and essentially the art classes. But it's being done, this kind of training is being done not deliberately and specifically the way we teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. It is a mode of thinking which is used but not taught systematically. So I'm proposing to you tonight that in future, the art teachers, now called art teachers, will become, as I say, teachers of cognition who are teaching ways of thinking through art, ways of thinking through teaching perceptual skills in particular. And then we hope, my group and I are really working on this now, attempting to find efficient ways to transfer those skills to reading comprehension, math comprehension, science comprehension, and so on, to bring to bear that powerful brain half, that powerful brain mode on problems, creative problem solving, and problem solving in general. Now, what happens then to art as we have known it, that is creative art? Well, that's still going to go on. There still will be advanced classes or special classes for children who want to become art majors, who want to be artists ultimately. Just as in reading, we have special classes for kids who want to become poets or do creative writing. Those classes will still be there and give us as art teachers the satisfaction of dealing with those very creative aspects. But essentially to bring the teacher into the core program, to become a teacher of cognition, a cognition that is visual, perceptual, global, and analogic, so to speak, metaphoric. This is going to be a different kind of art teaching. You're doing it already, but we need to become much more specific about this and what the gains are for the students by learning to bring both modes to bear on learning in general, to teach kids how to do that through drawing. So this is essentially what I'm going to be talking about tonight, the strategy that we have developed to do this. Now, in my opinion, I don't know how you all feel about this, but in my opinion, this is a wonderful situation. Right now is very difficult because we keep saying this and we cannot articulate it well enough to convince people not to cut the art programs. But time is on our side, I believe, as the L mode things are more efficiently done all the time. It is this other aspect is coming in from the outside. LA Times just 2 days ago had an article in which the mathematicians are agreeing that much of mathematics is visual and not numerical, and that most mathematical problems solved by good mathematicians are solved visually. So this is coming in from the outside, and we're going to be ready for it. It's a wonderful new role, I think, for the art teachers. How can we assume this role? Well, I think we need to be very clear on what we're doing. I think we need to not mix up too much. You know, the teachers of reading, writing, and arithmetic don't mix up too much when they are teaching for skills, skill building, and when they are teaching for creative expression. They don't get confused about that. We tend to mix the stuff up a lot, probably for the good of the students, but probably not for the good of the field, because the decision makers in schools want to know what are the skills you are building, how are you assessing those skills, is this a kind of a standard assessment, can we count on it, in other words, are you teaching something substantive, and can you show me that on a piece of paper? Skills. And I think that we have to meet that need. And we can do that. We can set standards for skills. We can first set the skills that are required, set standards, and do some assessments that carry weight. Now, one of the ways to assess, I'm going to suggest to you, is collecting before and after drawings. This is really effective. If anyone doubts the power of an image to convince, you have only to think of the recent incident in Los Angeles, the Rodney King beating incident, to know the power of a visual image over words. So I urge you to collect your students' drawings when they come in, be able to show as a kind of visual assessment what these students are doing as they leave your class. And in addition, I'll try tonight to suggest a few other ways that we are assessing in order to, for the students, for ourselves, and for the needs of the university, in my case, to have some sound assessment methods. Okay, I think I'll start with the slides on that. I'll try to. We'll have time for some questions. I'm going to go through a lot of material tonight there. Okay, I guess we'll have to have the lights off on the screen. So as questions occur to you, please note them down, and we'll be doing a couple of little exercises, and we'll have some questions and answers. On the screen right now is an announcement that was made by President Bush late in 1989, that the decade of the 90s, he named the decade of the brain. Now I'm curious, did anyone in this audience ever hear about this? This announcement apparently fell like a stone into water, never to be heard from again. But there it is. I mean, he actually said this. He proposed it. The neuroscientists were thrilled and put out publications like this and so on. Now, the fact is that much of sociological thinking these days agrees that the 1990s, in fact, will be the year of the brain. It is the last frontier. We barely understand how it works. We are controlled by it, by the brain, unfortunately, and we certainly do need to understand it. So I hope that Bush was right. This was a slide that was given to me at the recent International Visual Literacy Conference. We really don't need all this stuff here. Myself out of the way. Giving notice that the brain, in fact, is the organ for learning. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Oh, is that too dark? Yeah, that's too dark. I'm afraid everyone will go to sleep if I seem to be caught here. And I have yet a third image of the brain. And I almost always show these images because one of the curious things about the brain is that I think it does not like to think about itself. It likes to do other things. But we really need to remember that it's there, working away, and for the most part, is out of control. No, it is really. It's really out of control. It's doing stuff it likes to do, or the way it thinks it should be done. And, I think a situation greatly to be desired would be to try to get the brain under better control. Now, if you doubt that it's out of control, you have only to think about, perhaps lying awake in the middle of the night, trying to get back to sleep and knowing you've got to get up and go to work at 6 a.m. And we all have found ways, or at least we try ways. Counting sheep, of course, is the classic way. I hope thinking you can bore it long enough to get it to work your way. And we all have these kind of secret methods for controlling our own brain. And large part of the work that I've been doing quite seriously over at least the last 5 years is to try to find ways, A, to understand what's going on in one's own brain, and B, to try to get what's going on under better control. So I'm going to suggest something. This is a right hemisphere cartoon. It says the right side of my brain says yes, but I'm waiting to hear from the left side of my brain. Now I like this cartoon because the research is properly used. That is, the cartoonist looked it up. Advertisements are talking about left brain, right brain. And it does seem that the right hemisphere, left hemisphere research has gone into popular knowledge. I mean, kids talk about it, they know about it. It's referred to without explanation in newspaper articles and so on. So it does seem that this has been incorporated in large part by the general public. Now, coming in on the plane today, there was an article in the TWA magazine on creativity stating that because of current situation, creative problem solving is perhaps one of the most desired traits that corporations are looking for in new employees. Now, they don't know how to look for it, and they hardly know how to recognize it when they find it. And often when they bring in a truly creative individual, that person perhaps doesn't fit in the corporate culture. So corporations have got a big problem with this whole idea of creativity. But without question, they are on the search for creativity. They want our schools to increase creative abilities. It runs right through the corporate culture. Now, the reason for this, of course, is that corporations American corporations don't have the luxury that we used to have to try out things and fail over a long period of time and then change directions and so on. Because of as this article pointed out, because of the rapid change in our cultures and worldwide interactions, we need to be able to, in an ever faster way, come up with creative problem-solving solutions. Now, this is what art does. And it's clear from the research that I did, quite extensive research for my second book, which is on the subject of creativity, that right hemisphere, or the visual system, is deeply involved in creative problem solving. That without it, you're not going to get problem solvers. So now corporations are saying to themselves, well, if creativity requires perceptual abilities, how then can we train that up? And they now are at least some corporations, 3M, for example, IBM, AT&T, are avidly searching for ways to do it. This is what you people know how to do, you see. You already know that. You are the persons they will be coming to. I don't think it's happening quite yet, but it's starting, you see. This notion that there are other ways and other expertise. There is other expertise out there. That's you and me. You know, we know what this is. We know what that language is. And we know how to read that language. And we know how to teach that language, you see. Now, our job, I want to reiterate, because this is the nitty-gritty, our job is to try to teach our students to transfer those skills to other ways of thinking. That's the difficult thing. So I urge you to talk with the teachers in your school who are teaching English, who are teaching mathematics, social science, geography, and try to work with them to find ways to bring both modes of thinking to bear on these problems. Ask them, what could I be doing in my art class that will help you with your geography? That is, if we're sharing students, how can I remind my students that what they're doing in art class will work for them in their math classes? And this needs thinking about. I need your help with this. We have a couple of experiments going. A graduate student is doing some work with mathematics. We're hoping to run a study down in Tempe, asking the question: if children learn to draw, that is, acquire visual perceptual skills, can we correlate this with a rise in reading and math comprehension scores? You see, this is the key, I think. Now, that's not to say that art will not go on in its more advanced aspect, in its creative work. But this, I think, is very exciting in many ways. So if we look at some aspects of creativity, these are the well-known characteristics: independence of thought, strong motivation, curiosity, being able to concentrate, and so on. Now, there are other aspects of creativity which I'd like to just mention to you, and which I think illustrate why corporations are having such problems in grappling with the problem of developing creative employees. And these aspects that I'm going to mention to you are not very attractive in American terms. And this comes from Silvano Arietti, who is a psychologist, has written some wonderful work on creativity. So Arietti reminds us that to be creative requires what he calls aloneness, to be alone, to be, in fact, a loner, so to speak, which is not considered in American culture a very positive thing. But Arietti reminds us that creative problem solving comes out of the brain in general of one person thinking about a problem or set of problems. Arietti also reminds us that to be creative requires what he calls the ability to let the mind wander. Now again, as teachers, this is worrisome, but nevertheless, this, by looking around, not wool gathering, but by actively being curious, allowing the mind to play with what may be risky ideas or unlikely ideas, this is how creative questions are asked. This is where it starts. And this requires often to be alone and to let the mind wander. Thirdly, Arietti reminds us that to be creative requires what he calls gullibility. Not exactly a positive trait in the American lexicon, I think. But what he means by this is that to be creative requires that you're able to entertain ideas that are off the wall, that are risky, that someone else might laugh at, and to entertain those ideas seriously. You know, this is the high school kid who has some grandiose notion of mapping the universe, and all his friends are laughing at him. But this is the kind of gullibility that, for example, Einstein had. It was said of Einstein he was as gullible as a child. And lastly, I like that last one because I myself have been known all my life as being gullible. I mean, you can tell me anything, and I will believe. And lastly, Arrietty reminds us that to be creative requires what he calls remembrance. And this, I think, is very interesting in terms of today, the experience of today's kids. What he means by that is, as he says, the remembrance of the traumas of one's past provide the deep ballast of the personality. And it's from this that one draws strength and creativity. Now, in our culture, we tend to say if you have a problem in the past, a trauma in the past, we say, well, you know, go to the therapist, talk it out, move beyond it, get on with your life, and so on. But Arrietty says, no. Yes, he said, don't let it bog you down, but at the same time, hold on to that, because that's the rich compost from which one's creative ideas will come. It's a very interesting concept. So we've got all this stuff, you know, in the lists of values and goals in schools, and corporations all want this. But what we don't want and what the corporations don't want is what goes along with it, you know, that creativity requires silence, as we were talking, aloneness, looking around, being gullible, all of these things. And we must let our kids do that. The art classes are perfect for that. In fact, it's probably the most welcoming of that kind of idea, I think. So Les, while we're on the subject of creativity, I want to, this is from my second book, Drawing on the Artist Within, and in this little matrix, I have set out the so-called 5 stages of creativity. If you're working on a problem right now, you might ask yourself at which stage you are in solving this problem. Because it does seem that for reasons that are unclear, creative problem solving moves in steps, or so-called stages. In the first stage, you ask a question. This is the person looking around, noticing that something is missing or a part doesn't fit or whatever, and asks a question. Now that question may take the form of, I wonder if, I wonder how come, or something like that. Having asked the question, if you're in that stage, the next stage is entered, called saturation, in which the person says, well, now I've asked this question, I'm going to go look up everything I can find out about this so I won't be reinventing the wheel. Maybe it's been answered already, or maybe I'll find an answer, and I won't have to bother with all the work of doing it. This stage is called saturation, in which now, guided by the question, which I think is a visual question, is asked from looking around and noticing, being in a gullible sense asking a question, and then researching to find out what other people have learned on it. And one literally tries to saturate the brain with information. Now, at the end, towards the end of this period of saturation, right along about here somewhere, anxiety sets in. Anyone at anxiety stage in your problem solving? Now, I wish I could tell you that you could escape anxiety, but anxiety seems to be part of the process. And it's excruciating. It goes something like this. I've been working on this problem for months or weeks or years or whatever. I can't find an answer to it. I'm sick of it. I'm fed up with thinking about it. I can't take it anymore. I'm going on vacation. Now, at that point, this kind of dismissal of the person to find the answer, at that point, the third stage is entered, called incubation, the most mysterious of all of these stages of thinking, of creativity, in which I think I have proposed, and I've had such agreement, the most astonishing agreement on this. I hope you agree also that, I mean, what I'm going to say is so outrageous that during the stage of incubation, I think that the brain on its own goes to work to try to solve the problem while the person does something else. Now, this is an outrageous thing to say because if you think about this, this brings up serious and profound questions about who's in charge here anyway. What do you think? Do you think that's the way it happens? God, it's so amazing, isn't it? Just imagine. Now, how could the brain do that? Well, I've suggested that perhaps the brain, now, having asked the question, saturated with information now, begins to rotate the problem, maybe in visual space, looking for how the parts fit together, looking perhaps for parts that may be missing or parts that don't fit, and then readjusting, and that process goes on using the more L mode information in a visual way, and keeps working and working and working until it all clicks together, at which point we arrive at the fourth stage, the great aha of creativity, which includes this moment of insight where the person says, I've got it. I see it now, is usually said. Now I see it, I see the whole thing. I see how it all fits together. And this moment can happen at any time, sitting in the bathtub, like Archimedes, standing in the shower, jogging, driving on the freeway is a great aha time. Any activity at all, even in conversation with a friend, as it was reported by the mathematician Poincaré, where he said he had been working on the problem of the Fuchsian formula, couldn't answer, went on vacation with his friend, and said, I won't think about it, and then wrote, as I placed my foot on the second step of the tram, the answer came to me. I knew it was right. I simply continued in conversation with my friend, and that night I went home and wrote it down. Now, that moment of insight is, I think, the two modes of thinking agreeing. Maybe it's the only time they ever agree. It's possible. And this provides this moment of joy. As Einstein said, the moment of greatest happiness of my life, when that important answer came to him. Now with that, and here we arrive at the key point. Once the fourth stage, the aha, has been reached, for most of us, the brain says, oh, thank God it's over. Now we can get on, and we'll pick a new problem and we'll do it. Now, what is left to do is called verification. And verification means that the insight that has been given to one from this wonderful 3 pounds of gray matter must be finished. It must be brought to completion. That is, the course restructured, the opera written, the movie made, the book written, whatever the creative project is, a reorganization of the board of directors or whatever it is. It must be then completed. Now, how many in this room have had wonderful creative ideas that you never brought to fruition? I must raise my hand on this. Yes. So as it turns out, it's very interesting in light of the corporation's search for creative thinking and so on. The interesting thing is that creative problem solving is not the problem. The brain loves to do this stuff. It is carrying through in that final stage of verification that in fact is the problem. We're going to try to get Dennis Deek to write his book. I'm shaming you, and you must in turn shame me. John will say, get on with that book, because this in fact is the problem. It's not creative ideas, honestly. The brain loves to do that. Just as attested in this room, where you've all, and myself included, have had wonderful ideas, but we were not driven to complete it. And this is the service, I think, that the art teachers can give to our students. We say, that's not good enough to have a good idea. Now you must carry it through. And really get them to do that. I think that we probably are in a better position to do that than teachers perhaps in other areas. I brought in this little slide that comes from de Bono, Edward de Bono, which I think typifies what he calls it, two different ways of thinking. Vertical thinking in the left hemisphere and lateral thinking here. And I won't go through the whole process here, but essentially what de Bono is saying is that in vertical thinking, in general, it starts with a single answer, not multiple possibilities, as with the visual system looking around, but a single, given this data, lands on a single possibility, tests out the data to see, finds that this one fits, but you'll notice that these two shapes are different. And left hemisphere will say, that's okay, it's close enough. And finds that there's one piece left over here. What happens to this piece? It just gets kicked out. Let's get rid of it. It doesn't work. It ruins the solution and so on. Now, in terms of creative problem solving, this is a very rigid system. And it leaves this leftover stuff. Often it's the leftover stuff that's interesting, as a matter of fact, creatively interesting. Right hemisphere uses a different mode, de Bono says. Envisions a lot of possibilities. This is this looking around and wondering. Works from back to front, as you can see. Starts gathering data, insists that everything must fit all together, and will only be satisfied when all of the pieces are used. Which I think is it's an interesting illustration. We all know what happens when that piece gets kicked out. And oddly enough, you will remember this when you hear this next time, someone kicking a piece out, saying, we'll just skip that for now. You know that that's someone's left hemisphere talking. Now, in terms of management of the brain, this, I think, is a wonderful metaphor. There's a lot of talk in education these days about metacognition. And really, the Star Trek model is much clearer and much simpler, I think. And kids love this. In this model, of course, Mr. Spock represents the left hemisphere, and he's perfect for that role. Dr. McCoy represents the right hemisphere. Unfortunately, at least in the old series, Dr. McCoy is presented as the weakest and a sort of flaky member of the crew. Again, I think with the prejudice against the right hemisphere that runs through most cultures, whereas in fact the right hemisphere is extremely powerful and rapid. Scotty and the crew take care of the old brain, the so-called visceral brain, and significantly for this notion of getting brain processes under better control in order to draw or to creative problem solve, Captain Kirk is the key figure. Now, what this suggests, actually in brain hemisphere research, neurological research, there has been postulated, as well as right hemisphere, left hemisphere, the visceral brain, and other parts of the brain, there has been postulated something that is actually called the executive of the brain, sometimes called the hidden observer of the brain. This is Captain Kirk, in my opinion. And the model is this, that one can, in effect, anyone who paints and draws knows this. I'm sure writers in the audience also, and sportsmen and sportswomen in the audience. But particularly in drawing, one knows that in drawing one is in a slightly different state of consciousness. You just know this. You know that you're seeing things differently. You know this. Anyone who works in art knows that in order to get the work done, you must arrange things so you can get over there, as the artists say. And if you ask an artist, are you in a different state of mind when you're drawing or painting, the artist will answer yes, without asking what you mean. They know what you mean because to do this work, you must get control over these brain shifts. Otherwise, the work won't get done. So I think the reason that my application of the original scientific work was among the first is that I'm from the field of drawing and painting, that we know that these shifts take place, and we know that you've got to set up conditions to make those shifts take place. So the notion of Captain Kirk is not alien to the art teachers, to take information from both hemispheres to control who is on, and then to make judgments based on best information. See, this is the ideal thing. Now, what is it we want to teach our students? 3 things. We need to teach them, first of all, what is the difference between these 2 modes of thinking? And to try to teach that to them at experiential level, so they feel it, so they know it. What is the difference? Second, we need to teach them how to access the mode that's appropriate to the task. If the task is algebra, say, or let's say if the task is keeping time in an experiment, you don't want right hemisphere involved in that. Timekeeping is a left hemisphere task. But if the task is drawing a perceived object, envisioning a theme for an essay, looking around, hoping to ask a creative question, you don't want left hemisphere involved in that. You want to be able to tap into right hemisphere. So we need to teach our students how to control those brain shifts. This can be learned through drawing, because you can't do drawing unless you can make these shifts. Thirdly, we need to teach our kids how to combine these 2 modes when the task requires combining, as, for example, music. You need L mode for tempo, notation, and reading music, and so on. You need R mode for timbre, mood, expression, and melody in music. And those two things have to work together. Without one or the other, you have very bad music. So, our job as teachers of cognition then are to help our students to understand how the brain works, how they can become Captain Kirk, take information, the kids love this model, by the way, take information from both modes of thinking and use the information. Now, this is the sort of traditional list of functions, which I need not go through with you. And at this point, I would like to stop and do a little exercise. But if everyone in the room has done that vase faces, I don't want to. Do we need to go through this at all? I don't think we do, really. This is checkbook balancing, and this is freeway driving. Let's put it down. And one does not like the other. Right hemisphere hates checkbook balancing. Left hemisphere hates freeway driving. How many in this room do a lot of creative thinking while on the freeway? Aha, right. How many of you have actually gone right past your destination and didn't even know it? Okay. Would you like to do that little exercise? I can demonstrate to you how I set it up. Shall we do it? Let's take your hand out. And let's do this little exercise designed to illustrate this. Oh, we're out of left-handers. How many left-handers do we have here tonight? Aha. Nicely distributed in the room, I see. About 10% of the population. Yeah, if you'll keep your hand up, John has some left-handers. Okay, let's do this little exercise. And I know that most of you have done it, but just to illustrate how we're setting this up in our classes. Okay, the purpose of this exercise is to demonstrate the possibility of conflict between these two systems. Now, the fact is they can conflict. Given an event like this event tonight, in your brain, this is being processed in two ways. One, listening to the words, the other, watching the body language, the gestures, the facial expression. The ambience of this whole event is processed